She was known as a warrior who never gave up. Among her people, she was called a symbol of courage. From her earliest days, she had been trained to fight, to protect, and to carry the honor of her people on her shoulders. She was not the strongest in size nor the tallest, but her spirit was unshakable. Many who fought beside her in battle said that when she walked onto the field, they felt safer. She carried herself with pride, and her armor shone as if it carried the light of every victory she had earned. It was for this reason that the leaders of her people chose her to represent them. The alien kingdom had called for peace talks, but those who understood the king knew it was not peace he sought. He was proud, powerful, and feared even by his own kind. To him, humans were small, fragile, and unworthy of standing as equals. So when he agreed to let a human warrior enter his palace, it was not respect that guided him but curiosity, and perhaps the desire to prove his own superiority. The journey to the alien kingdom was long and filled with unease. The warrior rode, with only a small escort, for the meeting was meant to show trust. Yet every step closer to the towering gates of the palace made her heart heavier. She was not afraid, but she understood the weight of what she carried. If she failed, her people would be seen as weak. If she stood tall, even in the face of danger, she could win respect for all of them. When the grand doors of the palace opened, she entered with her head held high. The hall was enormous, far larger than anything she had ever seen. The walls sparkled with strange lights, and the floor reflected her armored boots as she walked. Above her, alien banners hung, each one telling a story of victories and conquests. She understood then that this was not just a palace, it was a reminder to anyone who entered that the alien king had never been defeated. The court was already full. Rows upon rows of alien nobles stared down at her, their faces filled with amusement and disbelief. To them, she was only human, too small to carry such pride. Whispers ran through the room like cold wind. Some mocked her armor, calling it fragile, compared to their own. Others laughed at the idea that a human could stand in the same hall as their king. She heard every word, but her face did not change. She kept walking, each step steady, each breath calm. At the far end of the hall, the alien king sat upon a throne that seemed carved from stone and fire. His presence filled the room more than the throne itself. His eyes were sharp and his voice when he spoke carried power. He looked at her not as a guest, not even as a rival, but as a piece of entertainment. "So this is the human warrior," he said, his tone heavy with mockery. "This is the one you send to stand before me?" The hall erupted in laughter. The warrior felt the sound pressing against her like waves, but she stood still. She removed her helmet, letting the court see her face clearly. Her eyes met the king's, and she spoke with calm strength. "I am here not to entertain you, but to represent my people. We came in good faith." The king leaned forward, studying her as though she were an insect caught in his hand. "Good faith?" he repeated, his lips curling into a cold smile. "We shall see what your faith is worth. I have heard of your victories, human. I have heard of your pride. But here in my kingdom, pride means nothing. Here strength rules, and I will show all who watch that your spirit is as fragile as your armor." Her heart did not waver, but she understood the meaning of his words. He would not treat this as a meeting of peace. He wanted a spectacle. He wanted to break her, not just her body, but the spirit that carried her people's hope. She stood silently, not replying to his threat, for she knew that any word she spoke would be twisted against her. Instead, she let her silence become its own kind of defiance. The king gestured, and the court grew silent at once. His voice echoed through the hall as he declared, "Prepare the arena. Let all witness the truth of human weakness. Let this warrior show what pride is worth when it is crushed beneath real power." The crowd cheered, excited at the promise of a fight. To them, it was nothing more than entertainment. To her, it was a test far greater than any she had faced before. She would not fight for her life alone. She would fight for the pride of her people, for the hope that humans could be seen as more than fragile outsiders. As she was led from the hall, the whispers followed her, sharper than blades. She will not last long, they said. Her spirit will break like glass. She heard them all, and though her heart grew heavy, her steps remained steady. Deep inside, she made a silent vow. If the king wanted to test her, he would see that the spirit of a human was not so easily broken. She did not know then how harsh the test would be, nor how much she would lose before it was over. But in that moment, as the doors of the palace closed behind her and the arena loomed ahead, she carried herself with the same pride she had always known. The crowd could laugh, the king could scheme, but she would face whatever came with her head unbowed. The next morning, the whole alien kingdom seemed to buzz with excitement. Word had already spread across the land that the human warrior would face a test inside the great arena. Merchants closed their shops, children ran through the streets, chanting about the coming duel, and nobles prepared their finest clothes to attend. To them, this was not just an event, it was entertainment, a spectacle they believed would prove once and for all that humans were weak. The arena itself was massive, built from stone that seemed older than memory. Its walls rose high into the sky, and its gates were so wide that even giant beasts could walk through them. Thousands of seats circled the fighting ground, and every seat was filled long before the duel began. The sound of the crowd was deafening, like thunder rolling across the land. Flags of the alien kingdom waved proudly, and the people chanted their king's name in unison. In the center of it all, she stood. The human warrior walked into the arena with her armor shining under the sun. Though her heart carried the weight of the challenge, her steps were steady. Every clang of her boots against the stone ground echoed in the silence that briefly fell when she appeared. Some in the crowd laughed, some jeered, but others fell quiet, surprised by the calm and dignity in her movements. She looked small compared to the size of the arena, but her spirit filled the space. From a raised throne built into the arena's walls, the alien king watched with sharp eyes. His voice soon filled the air, carried by a strange device that made it echo across the crowd. Today, he declared, we show the truth of strength. This human, so proud and decorated among her kind, dares to stand here before us. But pride without power is nothing. Watch closely, for today her spirit will break. The crowd roared in response, their voices mixing into a single wave of sound. The warrior raised her head but did not flinch. She knew that the king was not simply speaking to his people, he was trying to shake her confidence. She held her sword tightly, reminding herself that she did not stand here for her own pride, but for the honor of her people. Then the gates at the far side of the arena opened. The ground trembled as her opponent entered. He was one of the kingdom's strongest champions, a figure taller and broader than any human soldier. His armor was dark and heavy, carved with symbols of victories past. In his hand he carried a weapon so large it looked as though it could crush stone in a single swing. The crowd cheered wildly at his arrival, chanting his name again and again. For a brief moment the warrior felt the weight of fear. This was no ordinary duel. The king had chosen an opponent not to test her but to crush her in front of all. Yet she breathed deeply, steadying herself. She had fought battles before where the odds were against her. She knew that victory did not always come from strength of body, but also from strength of mind. The signal was given, and the duel began. The champion charged forward with speed that seemed impossible for his size. The ground shook beneath his steps, and his weapon swung through the air with a force that made the crowd gasp. She dodged quickly, her smaller frame allowing her to move faster than her opponent expected. Her sword struck out, aiming for the gaps in his armor. Sparks flew as metal hit metal, and the crowd erupted in surprise. For the first few moments, she held her ground. Each movement was precise, every strike filled with determination. The crowd, who had expected her to fall instantly, began to watch with more interest. Some even gasped in admiration. She could hear their voices shifting from mockery to disbelief. The king's face, however, remained calm. He had seen many battles, and he knew that skill alone could not stand forever against overwhelming strength. Slowly, the champion began to press harder. His strikes grew faster, heavier, and closer with each swing. The sound of his weapon slamming into the ground echoed like thunder. She dodged, rolled, and countered, but each move demanded more energy. Sweat dripped down her face beneath the helmet. Still, she refused to back down. With each attack, she looked for openings. For a moment, she even managed to strike his side, her sword scratching his armor deeply enough to draw a gasp from the crowd. The alien champion stumbled, but quickly steadied himself. The people cheered loudly, impressed that the human had landed a blow at all. For a second, hope flickered in the air. The king, however, leaned forward with a cold smile. His champion had only begun to unleash his true strength. With a roar, the massive fighter lifted his weapon high, and the air itself seemed to tremble. When the weapon came down, the ground beneath her cracked. She barely managed to shield herself, but the force threw her off balance. The crowd roared with excitement. From that moment, the duel became even harsher. The champion's strikes rained down like storms, and each block made her arms ache. Her sword vibrated with the force of his blows. She felt her strength slowly draining, yet her heart refused to yield. She reminded herself again and again, she was not here only as one person. She was here as the face of her people. If she surrendered, it would mean more than her own defeat. The crowd watched eagerly, some cheering for the champion, others now whispering in awe at the human's bravery. She fought on, her spirit refusing to bow, even as the odds grew heavier against her. Each movement, each strike, was not only a fight for survival, but a declaration that she would not allow herself to be broken easily. Yet in the back of her mind, she knew that the king's order was clear. This was not a duel she was meant to win. It was a stage built to humiliate her, to break her pride in front of all. The question that haunted her as the champion pressed forward was not if she would fall, but how much she could endure before the blow that would change everything finally came. The duel grew heavier with every passing moment. Dust rose from the arena floor, swirling around them as the sound of clashing metal filled the air. The human warrior's breaths came sharp and fast, her chest rising and falling beneath her armor. Still, her eyes burned with determination. She had faced countless battles before, but never one so unbalanced. Each swing of the alien champion's weapon carried enough force to break stone. Each block sent shockwaves up her arms, numbing her muscles. Yet, she held on. The crowd was no longer laughing. In the beginning, they had jeered, certain she would fall within seconds. But as minutes passed and she continued to stand, they began to watch with awe. Their voices mixed. Some still mocked her, others shouted for her defeat, but many now whispered about her courage. Even in the face of overwhelming power, she refused to surrender. The champion roared, swinging his weapon in a wide arc that would have crushed her had she been slower by even a breath. She rolled across the ground, dust clinging to her armor, and rose back to her feet. Her sword flashed as she countered, striking at the gaps in his armor once more. For a moment, the crowd gasped as sparks flew, but her blade only scratched the surface. His armor was too thick, too strong. Her arms ached, her lungs burned, and her body grew heavy. Yet her spirit told her not to give in. She reminded herself of her people, of the trust placed on her shoulders. She could not allow this kingdom to see humans as weak. Even if she could not win, she had to show that a human spirit could not be crushed so easily. But then it happened. The moment that would be remembered by all who witnessed it. The champion lifted his weapon high above his head, both hands gripping it tightly. The sun glinted off the sharp edge as the crowd fell silent, waiting for the strike. The human warrior raised her shield and braced herself. She knew she might not survive the blow, but she would not kneel. The weapon came down with a force unlike anything she had faced before. The sound was deafening, metal smashing against metal, followed by the sharp crack of something breaking. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stop. Then the echo rolled through the arena and the truth became clear. Her shield had shattered. Her armor split apart as the impact rippled through it. Pieces of metal fell to the ground, clanging loudly. The proud armor she had carried into the arena, the symbol of her victories and her strength, lay in ruins around her feet. The crowd gasped, then erupted in wild cheers. They had waited for this moment, the moment when the human warrior's pride was struck down. The champion stepped back, towering over her as she fell to one knee. Her sword trembled in her grip, her body weak from the force of the blow, but it was not only her armor that had broken. In the eyes of the crowd, her pride had shattered too. The woman who had entered with her head held high now knelt on the ground, stripped of the protection that had made her seem untouchable. The king leaned forward on his throne, his lips curling into a satisfied smile. This was what he had wanted, not her death, but her humiliation. To him, the sight of her broken armor was proof that the human spirit was fragile. The warrior felt the sting of tears, but she did not let them fall. Her chest ached not only from the impact, but from the weight of defeat pressing down on her. For the first time in her life, she felt the sharp edge of shame cutting deeper than any blade. She could hear the crowd shouting, their voices drowning out her thoughts. Some cried out in victory, others mocked her, and still others praised the champion's power. She tried to rise, her legs trembling, but the weight of the blow made it nearly impossible. Her sword slipped slightly in her hand, its edge dull with scratches. She looked down at the broken pieces of her armor scattered around her, each one a reminder of what she had lost. That armor had been more than metal. It had been her pride, her shield, her identity as a warrior. And now it was gone, destroyed in front of thousands of eyes. Still, deep inside, her spirit flickered. She told herself, armor can break, bodies can fall, but spirit must not bow. She forced herself, up her movement slow but steady. She lifted her sword once again even though her body screamed in pain. The crowd gasped at her defiance. They had expected her to give up, to kneel in defeat. But though her armor was gone, she refused to surrender. The king narrowed his eyes, his smile fading slightly. He had expected her to crumble completely, yet here she stood, broken but unyielding. Her pride might have been torn from her, but her spirit still clung to life. For a moment, silence swept through the crowd as they watched her raise her sword once more. The champion, however, showed no mercy. He swung again, and she barely dodged, the wind of the strike brushing past her face. Her body ached with every movement, but still she fought. Each swing of her sword now came slower, weaker, but filled with determination. She was no longer fighting to win. She was fighting to show that even in defeat, her spirit could not be fully broken. The battle dragged on, but the outcome was clear. She was too wounded, too stripped of her strength to last much longer. Yet in the eyes of many in the crowd, something had changed. They had come expecting to see a human crushed, but what they saw was resilience beyond reason, a spirit that rose even when everything else had fallen. As the champion's weapon slammed into the ground once more, sending dust flying, the warrior dropped to her knees again. Her sword slipped from her hand this time, clattering against the stone. She panted, her body unable to continue. The crowd cheered wildly, believing it was over. The king leaned back in his throne, satisfied. To him, the human had been broken. She had lost her armor, her strength, and her pride, all in one blow, and in front of the entire kingdom, he believed. Her spirit had been crushed forever, but within her heart, though weak and trembling, a small flame still burned. The arena was still ringing with cheers when the warrior was carried away. She did not resist. Her body was too heavy, her strength nearly gone. The blow that had shattered her armor had left marks across her skin, and even deeper ones upon her heart. Her pride, the thing she had carried like a shield, felt crushed. The whispers of the crowd followed her even into the shadows beyond the gates. They laughed, they mocked, and some pitied her. To them, she had been a symbol of human pride, and now she was nothing more than a broken warrior. She was taken to a chamber deep inside the palace. It was not a prison, yet it did not feel like a place of honor either. The walls were cold, and the silence inside was heavy. She sat alone, staring at her hands, which trembled slightly from the duel. Her sword had been taken away, her armor gone, and the weight of humiliation pressed upon her shoulders more than any chains ever could. For hours she did not speak. Her mind replayed the fight again and again. She remembered the sound of her armor cracking, the gasps of the crowd, and the look of triumph in the king's eyes. Each memory felt like a wound reopening. She had been a soldier all her life, and she had lost battles before. But this was different. Those losses had been in war, standing beside comrades fighting for survival. This defeat had been public, intentional and cruel. The king had not wanted her life. He had wanted her pride. And in front of thousands, he had taken it. The next day, she was allowed to walk the palace grounds. Guards watched her carefully, though they did not treat her harshly. To them, she was no longer a threat. They whispered as she passed, calling her the broken human or the warrior without armor. Each word cut her deeply. She tried to keep her face calm, but her heart ached. When she passed through the palace halls, she heard nobles laugh at her name. They spoke as though she were not even human, but an object that had served its purpose as entertainment. "Did you see her face when her armor broke?" one noble said, laughing. "She looked like a child who had lost her toy." Others chuckled, adding their own cruel remarks. She walked on silently, but inside her chest anger grew. Not the wild anger that made one reckless, but the deep, quiet anger of someone who had been wronged and humiliated. She clenched her fists, at her sides nails pressing into her palms. Yet she did not let her anger rule her. She swallowed it, letting it fuel her instead of consume her. At night, she returned to her chamber. Alone in the darkness, she thought of her people. What would they think if they could see her now? Would they be ashamed? Would they turn their backs on her? The thought nearly broke her. Yet, another thought came. Perhaps they would not see her as broken, but as someone who endured even when crushed. Perhaps the fact that she had stood at all, against such overwhelming odds, was still something worth respect. The days that followed were heavy. She was not asked to fight again, nor was she treated as a guest. She was simply left in the palace, her presence ignored, as if her defeat had erased her importance. The silence pressed on her more than the mocking voices. She began to wonder who she was without her armor, without her victories, without her pride. Was she still a warrior? Or had the king truly broken her spirit? One night, unable to sleep, she stood in the courtyard beneath the alien stars. There, light was strange and cold, so different from the stars of her homeland. She raised her hands and whispered, "I have lost everything. My armor, my pride, even the respect of those who watched me. But must I also lose myself?" It was then that she realized something. The king had taken her armor. He had shattered her pride. But he had not taken her spirit entirely. It still lived, though small, deep inside her. It flickered like a tiny flame, almost hidden in the ashes of defeat. If she chose to let it die, then she would truly be broken. But if she chose to protect it, feed it, and let it grow, then perhaps she could rise again. From that night onward, she began to train in secret, without armor, without weapons, only with her body. Each morning she stretched her arms. Each night she practiced her stances, every movement a reminder that she still had strength. Her body hurt, her wounds burned, but she pressed on. She had once believed her armor was her strength, but now she learned to fight without it. She reminded herself, strength does not only come from metal, it comes from the heart. Her humiliation did not vanish, but it began to transform. Instead of crushing her, it hardened her resolve. If she could endure the pain of shame and the weight of mockery, then there was nothing else the king could do to her. They could laugh, they could whisper, but they could not take away the fire that still burned inside. The human warrior understood then that defeat was not the end. It was a beginning. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of the duel began to fade for the alien kingdom. The crowd moved on to other entertainments, other victories of their champions. They no longer cared about the human warrior. To them, she had been broken and was no longer worth attention. But in the shadows of the palace, she was changing. Each day she grew stronger. Her wounds healed, her body grew sharper, and her mind became calmer. Without armor to hide behind, she had learned to rely on herself alone. Without pride to blind her, she had learned humility. And with humility, she had found a new kind of strength. One morning, the king himself called for her. She was brought into the great hall once again. The nobles whispered, smirking as they saw her enter without armor or sword. To them, she was only a reminder of a past humiliation. But as she walked, her steps were steady, her head held high, and her eyes calm. She no longer looked like someone broken. She looked like someone unshaken. The king studied her carefully. He had expected to see defeat still heavy in her face, but instead he saw resilience. He narrowed his eyes and said, "Human, I thought your spirit was gone, yet you stand before me as though nothing has happened. Do you not know you are defeated?" Her voice was quiet but firm. Armor can break, pride can fall, but spirit endures as long as one chooses to stand. You tried to crush me, but I am still here. The hall grew silent. The nobles stopped whispering, their eyes fixed on her. They had expected her to remain small, humiliated, forever bowed. Instead, she spoke with strength greater than before. The king leaned back in his throne, his expression unreadable. For the first time, murmurs in the court were not of mockery but of surprise. Some even whispered in respect. Though she had lost the duel, she had shown something rare: the ability to rise from defeat without bitterness, to turn humiliation into strength. The king said nothing more, but in his silence the truth was clear. He had not broken her spirit as he had wished. He had only given her the chance to prove its strength. In the days that followed, the story of the human warrior began to spread beyond the palace. Not the story of her armor shattering, but the story of her rising again, training without rest, standing tall even after being struck down. Among her people, news returned that she had endured, that she had not allowed herself to be crushed. They did not see her as defeated, but as stronger than ever, and so the human warrior found herself transformed. She had entered the alien kingdom with armor and pride, believing those were her strength. She had lost both in a single blow, yet, in losing them, she had found something greater: the true meaning of resilience. Her story became more than her own. It became a reminder to all who heard it, that armor can be broken, pride can be shattered, but a spirit that refuses to give in can never be destroyed. When she finally returned to her homeland, her people gathered to see her. She no longer wore the shining armor they remembered, yet when they looked into her eyes, they saw something brighter. They saw a warrior who had faced shame, who had been stripped of everything, yet who had risen stronger than before. They saw hope. And so, though the alien king had tried to break her, his plan had failed. In trying to shatter her spirit, he had instead helped her discover its true power. She had lost her armor and her pride in one blow, but she had gained something far greater, an unshakable spirit that no king, no weapon, and no crowd could ever take away.